Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome to the Humble Scholar, and today we are going to look at the ideology and theory of Karl Marx, and we are going to discuss the how capitalism is destined to fall and be thrown by the proletariat class, and how the revolution will proceed, and which lead to the and how the proletariat dictatorship will go on and will lead to the classless community, the communist community at the end of the day. We are also going to discuss the merits and the weaknesses of the Karl Marx theory, his theory of surplus value, subsistence or wage, and also we are going to look into the details of concepts of the historical materialism, his dialectical materialism. Everything is going to be completed in a series of lectures, and please do watch my other videos so that you have got the full grasp of the Karl Marx. So let's get going. So first of all, do subscribe my channel. It won't take more than 5 seconds. So, dialectical materialism, his concept of dialectic. So, we must first of all know that what is the dialectical method. The dialectical method is actually the process and the method or the conception that the progress results from the conflict of opposing forces. Here, we have got two arrows, one force, the other force, and these conflicting forces will result into progress. Another thing. So let's dive deep into this dialectical method. So Hegel was the first person who introduced his dialectical method. And what was the Hegel's idea? Hegel's idea was that the progress over the period of time or over the history is a result of clash of ideas. So this is what is important is the clash of ideas. In a consequence of there is thesis and there is antithesis, and what we got due to their clashes, synthesis, a new thesis or something, a new idea. It means that two ideas clash and we generate a new idea, and this is how history has progressed through the period of time. And what we see is that due to these conflicting ideas, due to this thesis, antithesis, and then synthesis, there are material changes which come into being as a result, reflecting this dialectic and the clash of ideas. So here we see that the clash of ideas generate the material changes in our physical world, in our environment. But what Marx did was he said that the Hegel's theory is standing on his head. So he turned the Hegel's theory. And what Marx said was that the clash is of material forces. That there is a time when the material forces come into clash, into conflict, and then the this is how the history has progressed over a period of time. And then due to these clash of material forces, what we see is that ideas are the products. And what Hegel advocated was that the clash of ideas generate material changes. But Marx quite oppositely said that the material forces are in conflict, and which result is being the ideas are produced as a result of the conflict of the material changes. So it might be confusing in the beginning, but I am going to let you guys dive deeper into this, and you will get to know how there are these clashes of material forces and how the ideas are the products of this material environment. So let's do not waste time and get to the concept. Now, the thing is that you have to understand certain terminologies, and which are these that the relation there are these the relations of production, and the other one is the forces of production. Now, what are the forces of production? Forces of production are actually it can be the raw material. These are the natural resources. These are the techniques or the technologies also, which are used to produce the commodities. Commodities are generally the products. You can think of any industrial product. uh, which might be even the spare parts of the cars or anything that the laborers produce in industries. So what we use is the raw material. These are the natural resources. These are techniques and the technologies which we use in industries. So these are the forces of production. Uh, not necessarily in industries. The agriculture, the instruments used in the agriculture production are also the forces of production. So these are the forces of production or the material of production. And what the other terminologies is the relations of production. Now, what Marx expounded is that men enter into the relations of production which depend upon the forces of production. How is this? Is we will get to know this line. You will get to understand by the historical communities. So this is how in history there were certain civilizations. So first of all was the hunter-gatherer society or the tribal society, in which men used to live in the tribes, and they were hunting was men used to do hunting and the women used to do the domestic work. So there was two classes. We can say that two classes, not necessarily, but we can assume one class was men and the other was the women. Now in the next class you will get to know how these forces of production, relations of production in primitive communism. Now in primitive communism, tribes certain tribes came together to form a city. And then there were in the beginning of the primitive communism, what we saw was, so all of this that I'm discussing comes under the historical materialism, because what Marx said was that the history has progressed, and history is actually about the material things. So he was kind of teleological view, a materialistic view of history Marx presented us. So this comes under the historical materialism, because we are looking at the history in the view of material concept. So in the beginning of the primitive communism, certain tribes came together to form a community, a society, or we can say a city. And in the beginning of this primitive communism stage, there were enough commodities or products that were the people were self-reliant, kind of. There was no surplus production, but due to agriculture revolution that came, and due to the agriculture revolution, the production uh, increased and there was surplus production, like surplus in a sense that more than what people needed for themselves. So when there was surplus production, and then there came the concept of ownership, and then there came the production concept of the ownership of property, also ownership of these surplus products. And then by the end of the primitive communism, it gave rise to the concept of the slave and master. So here master was the owner of land, the owner of surplus agricultural production, and the slave was the one working under the master, for the master. So here we see that the forces of production is agriculture production, and the relations of production is master and slave relation. So the thing is, the forces of production will determine the relations of production. Let's get to the next stage. Then the feudalism came. In feudalism, there were serfs or peasants and the feudal lords. Now, the feudal lords had properties, they had their lands, and the serfs or the peasants used to, you know, um, uh, kind of, they were working on the lands of the feudal lords. Usually, these are tenants, we also call them. So the tenants will work on the lands of the feudal lords and will also give a share of their production to the feudal lords. So here we see that the forces of production were land, and here also agriculture. So the relations of production were feudal lords and serfs. Now here The last point will, you will get to know the essence of this concept of historical materialism and how these relations of production and forces of production, because we are experiencing it by ourselves. That is the capitalism. These days, many of the countries are actually, uh, most of the countries are capitalist, like USA, UK, Australia, name you just name it. So here, the four relations of production are bourgeoisie class and the proletariat class. Now, the bourgeoisie class owns the forces of production, owns the means of production, owns the methods of production, which are they own their own. They own the whole industries, raw materials, natural resources, or the technologies and the techniques. And the proletariat class are the labor class. They are the workers. They do work in their industries. So here we see that the forces of production have changed. Now there is different technology. We are producing different commodities or different products, and as a result of which there are different relations. Now it's not master-slave relation; it's bourgeoisie and proletariat class. This relation is the labor class and the capitalist class. Proletariat is the labor class or working class, and bourgeoisie is, or we can say bourgeoisie class, is the capitalist class owning the forces or the methods of production. So this is how Marx defined history by its materialist concept, that according to the forces of production there were the relations of production. However, when we see that the material forces of production come into conflict with the relations of production, then comes the period of social revolution. How is that so? Because when the material forces of production change, and that we have those old relations of production, then comes the period of social revolution, because uh, the in case of the working class, or that is this obeying class, these relations of production become the shackles for these obeying class. They are at a stage reaches when they are done with this this exploitation by at the hands of the commanding class, or at the hands of the capitalist class, or the class which owns the forces of production or the means of production. So for example, there comes a stage when there is feudalism, a system of feudalism. Now, but we see that, and the relations of production are serfs and land feudal lords. But we see that there is a new class is being generated, and where there is the forces of production change. Now the technology has developed. We were there at agriculture, at tenants and self feudal lords, and now technology is being developed. Now the forces of production has changed, so it compels the relations of production to also be changed. Now it cannot be any longer the serfs and the feudal lords, because it must have to be now the proletariat and bourgeoisie class. So the relations of production must change when the forces of production change. So the next concept is the economic base and the superstructure. Now Marx implies that economic base determines or forms actually the superstructure. Now you must be wondering, what is the economic base, what is the superstructure? So let's define these terminologies first. Economic base is actually, this is the economic foundation that we have, or economic base. Economic foundation consists of the forces of production in a society plus the relations of production. Now we are acknowledged, we are contained with these terminologies. Now the forces of production like resources and technology, and the relations of production like command and obey, or owners and the workers who own the means of production, and the workers who work for the capitalist class or the ruling class, and they employ the techniques of production for the benefit, for the benefit of the commanding class. So this is how the relations of production plus the forces of production form economic foundation, economic base, or you can say economic structure in a society. And what is the superstructure? Superstructure consists of laws in a society, form of government, their culture, their values, art, religion, education, all such things consist of the superstructure. Now, what Marx says is that the economic foundation maintains and shapes how the superstructure of society will be. For example, here we have economic foundation, we have capitalist system. Now, when we have capitalist system, when we have capitalist system, the ruling class is the capitalist class, and the capitalist class is the ruling class, so they have access and they control actually media, press, uh, actually they form the public opinion. They kind of affect, influence, and manipulate the public opinion through media, press, TV, social media, etc. And even in education institutes, the minds of the students are engineered towards capitalism, so that everyone thinks in their mind and develops such opinion that capitalism is a good system, a good economic system. Even we see that even in today in our society, what is the meaning of success for us? The meaning of success for us today is how much wealth we accumulate in our life, how much wealthy we are. This is actually the criteria of success. So because we are living in a capitalist system, our values, our culture, and our government is according to that capitalist system. Because now the superstructure will be formed uh, and will be used to subjugate the working class. Even there is a trend that uh, there should be property ownership, that we must have uh, you know vast lands under our authority, or under our ownership, that we should have more property. This is what is looked as an honor in our society today. And in the early times, the white people were privileged, and they owned the means of production, so it was thought that the white people are actually more intellectually high. So this is how economic foundation maintains and shapes our superstructure in a society. Even the capitalist system is actually usually associated with democratic government. So here we see that in most of the capitalist countries today, there is democracy that's prevailed. So the values are democratic values. So this is how economic foundation or economic structure in a society determines the superstructure, and in turn the superstructure legitimizes the economic foundation. As we have seen, by using certain resources like media, press, education, by ensuring the minds of the people, we generate, the ruling class actually generates the public opinion towards the capitalist system. They legitimizes now the superstructure legitimizes the position of the ruling class, that yes, it's actually right, the system is right, and this is how it should go on. So this is what is economic base and economic structure, superstructure. Now what we see is that the change in foundation brings always results in more or less rapid transformation of superstructure. What Marx says is that when there is a change in the economic structure, or the economic system changes, our superstructure also changes. How? Now there is a certain ruling class. For example, just imagine that a certain country has undergone a transformation from capitalism to socialism, and now we have got the socialist class as the ruling class for the time being. For example, in the countries like Russia or China. So now the ruling class is the socialist class. So the superstructure will change. Uh, you know, less rapidly or more rapidly, the superstructure is compelled to be changed. Now the ruling class will change the superstructure to legitimize its own economic system or economic foundation, that is socialism. Now if the socialists or the ruling class, they will the values will not be kind of liberty, because these days communism is also associated with more liberty, political parties, or freedom of expression, freedom of speech, these values. So these values will be subsided. Also the laws will be there will be legislation, or the laws will be made according to the economic foundation or the economic system. So the laws will favor or will support the socialist system, and the government is a communist government, because we have the system of communism as our economic foundation. So this is what Marx implies, that the change in foundation always results in more or less rapid transformation of superstructure. The superstructure has to change when our economic foundation changes. Next point is that the principle and the values are not regarded as true or false, but inappropriate or appropriate. Now again, this is related to the previous point, is that uh, in this in this whole structure of society, the principles or the ideals, the values, or even the form of government is not considered as true or false, as true or not true, but as whether it's appropriate or not appropriate. Now, if we have capitalist system, we are more prone to have democracy as appropriate for us. The laissez-faire economy, uh, the less control of government. This is what we have. Even if we have communism in our society, then we will see that the government will be communist or socialist. So this is more like it should be appropriate or not. We cannot have communism and then democracy as a government. It won't be appropriate. So this is what he says, that the principles and the values are not regarded true or false, but appropriate or inappropriate. And the men are the product of the environment created spontaneously and by ruling class. So men actually do not create the environment, but men are actually the product of the environment, and the environment is actually kind of manipulated and formulated by the ruling class of that society. And by environment we also mean, more specifically, the superstructure. Here also, this point will be cleared by the next point, that the culture of society creates framework within which men think and act. Now, by uh, under this structure, the ruling class, in the superstructure, the culture is also a component of the superstructure. And in a certain culture, there is a framework within which men think, and outside of which or against which men does not think. Think of it as like in a capitalist system. If you are living in a capitalist country, we usually do not think of socialism. We do not think that there should be socialism, or we should the country should undergo a revolution, a socialist revolution, and should pursue communism. When we are usually living in a culture, in a capitalist culture, we do not think of socialism. So this is what he says, that the culture of society creates framework within which men think and act. And usually when men think about outside their frame of culture, they think that their views are not usually valid. This is what such thoughts come to their mind. But Marx cannot assert or endorse on this point so much, because Marx himself was living in a capitalist system. Marx and Engels were the people who thought out of their culture box, and who thought of bringing socialism, who thought of communism. So this point is not completely accurate. Marx's unequivocal assertion that economic structure determines the superstructure. Now, what Marx says is that, and I have already discussed it, that economic structure determines what the superstructure will be. In economic structure, we have capitalist class, the ruling class, then the superstructure, the values, the culture, education, everything will be according to the ruling class, that will legitimize uh, the position of the ruling class. This is what Marx says, and he says that if you want to bring change in the people's life, or you want to make your country progress, you cannot do that by just making changes in your superstructure, or making favorable laws, or changing the form of government, or changing your culture, art. You cannot do this by only doing tinkering, or tampering with the superstructure. You cannot bring permanent or long term favorable conditions for your people. And only through changes in the economic structure, the economic foundation, which is the relations of production and the modes of production. Only by changing the economic structure will the superstructure change. However, this is not actually completely true. And later also, Marx and Engels asserted that it's the economic structure is the most important factor, but not the only factor that can lead to the long-term changes or for the progress of the country. Economic structure is the most important factor, but not the only factor, because we see that the superstructure can also influence the economic base. Like we have inventions. Now, inventions are what? These are the ideas, values, philosophies through which new inventions are made, and these inventions will in turn change or influence our mode of production. When we develop certain technology, I have to get back to that slide. When we uh, develop develop certain technology, or there is some invention, it will affect the relations of production and the forces, because there is a change in the forces of production as a result of the superstructure, a change in superstructure. So it can be this way, it's not always this way. So this is what has been said, that the superstructure can influence the economic base, like inventions, or um, even when the favorable laws are passed for the labor class, the things change, the relations of production uh, might get a little better, and we will discuss it later. I guess the lecture has gone too long, and please visit the next lecture for further details. Do subscribe my channel.